Hello chess friends and welcome to the of Chess channel and welcome back to the European Team Chess Championship in 2021. We're now in the last round of the super event and we're following now of course what is Alireza doing in his match game against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, because here Alireza Firouzja has of course the opportunity to become the world's youngest 2800 rated player in chess history. So it's really a wild accomplishment when you think about it harder. Alireza Firouzja is only 18 years old, so he has now the opportunity to finally reach his 2800 rating goal, but he has also the opportunity to be the second best rated player in the world. So let's check out what happened. It was a brilliant gameplay by Alireza Firouzja against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. Here I think Alireza Firouzja has really opportunity to write chess history. So here Alireza opened with the move e4. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov response was e5. We have knight to f3, and after knight to c6 and bishop to c4, we have so far the Italian game, and after bishop to c5, the game transposed into the gioco piano, in the most popular line of course of the Italian game. So here we have castling, we have knight to f6, we have d3, pretty standard stuff of course, and after h6 here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov prevents of course this very annoying pin sometimes. Then of course after knight to c3 and knight to d5, the weak d5 square could be of course a long-term object here of white. So here in the continuation we have c3 by Alireza Firouzja, really a classical system. In the continuation of the game we can expect of course the move d4. This move has to be prepared of course further, because if you push the pawn d4 too early, then of course the e4 is a little bit weak, but as a long-term plan this is of course the main strategy here of white. So here d6, we have rook to e1 supporting now finally the e4 pawn, and here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov castles kingside, secures the king, again also pretty normal stuff. So h3, now again a prophylactic move also by Alireza Firouzja, because he wants to of course further attack the d4 square, but sometimes you can get pinned by an annoying bishop to g4 move. So that's why the bishop to g4 is of course attacking the knight, and the knight is of course controlling the center of the board. So here in the continuation we have a5, very important move also, because b4 b5 could be also an opportunity. So now with the move a5, at least Shakhriyar Mamedyarov is not allowing here some queenside attacks. Knight from b to d2, bishop to e6, pretty standard stuff I think. It seems maybe in the beginning sometimes when you starting to play chess that this move bishop to e6 is a weakness, because after bishop takes e6, f takes e6, you have of course a long-term weakness, this weak pawn on e6. But actually it's a simplification line, and there are many drawish lines here for both sides. There are many draws that were played in chess history, so that's why I think this bishop to e6 is really a drawish line, and many times you just witness draw after 25-30 moves in these types of structures. But it's of course also a game in which maybe a player that wants really win can really battle for win, just in order here, as I said, to attack simply the weakness. It's a long-term weakness, so as I said, I'm not the fan of this particular line, because here from black's perspective you cannot really improve this pawn structure so easily. So that's why I think Alireza Firouzja from this point on has at least a comfortable game. At least we can know what to attack here. Knight to b3, first attacking the bishop, and here again a similar idea here also with the move bishop to e3, but now after bishop to e3 and rook to e3, at least Alireza doesn't have to mess up his pawn structure. So if f takes e3 here, I think the game would really end in a draw. Both players would have an e3 e6 weakness, so here with these two knights on the board, so it should probably end in a draw. But here after rook to e3, still the engine for instance also gives equal chances for both sides. These are knights, and the cool part about at least what this e6 pawn is doing, at least it's restricting this very important squares here on the other side of the board, on black's camp, because the e6 pawn is controlling the f5 square, but also the d5 square. So we have now a4 kicking with the knight to d2, and now d5 here by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. You don't want to take, of course, e takes d5, then you just improve your opponent's pawn structure. That's I think the main issue here. So that here in the continuation black could have this disconnected pawns. Here in the continuation after move d5, Alireza Firouzja retreated with the rook, because here there was also this threat maybe to grab some space with the move d4. If d4 happens, then of course your rook is a little bit vulnerable to the attack. So here rook to e2, so far a good move here by Alireza. We have now b5 by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, e takes d5 finally, because after e takes d5, of course this pawn would be hanging on e5, Now I think white could have a comfortable game by simply playing knight to e5. So here you have to take with the knight, but the problem is now if you take here immediately knight to e5, then of course knight to e5, and here after rook to e5, the problem is now this move, a3. a3 is now opening the position on the queen side, and here you have to take, then of course the c3 is weak, then you probably lose also the a3, then also the d3 is weak. So it will be, I think, a temporarily pawn sacrifice here by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. He found, I think, here great move. So as I said, here after move e takes d5, he took with the knight to d5. It's much better because now a3 is a serious threat. It forces now Alireza to play the move a3 because now Alireza doesn't have time here to take out the pawn on e5, and now comes actually, I think, a drawish line that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov should have played. Knight to f4. Here Alireza played rook to e3, and again I think Shakhriyar Mamedyarov has this continuation: knight to d5, attacking the rook, and again if the rook retreats, again to play knight to f4. Even if you let's go back, even if you play something like knight to d5, again we knight to d5, if you play rook to e1, again I think black can solve, I think, all of the positional problems with the move knight to f4. The problem is now the d3 weakness, and again white needs to play rook to e3. Black continues simply with knight to d5, again rook to e1, knight to f4, and the game should probably end in a draw. So but here after move rook to e3, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, great attacker, he tried out to spice up a little bit the game. He tried now again to create some dynamics by playing the move queen to e8. So as I said, knight to d5, knight to f4, perpetual draw for black here immediately. So that's how drawish really the Italian game can be. After move rook to e8, we have now g3, a good move here by Alireza Firouzja. Here after knight to h3, king to g2, the knight has to escape, but now after knight to g5, h takes g5, we can notice now, okay, black gained the pawn, but it's really a weird pawn structure. All of these pawns are isolated, all of these pawns are long-term weaknesses. So from a perspective of pawn structures here, white is much better. It's now very easy to find the best next move for white. At least white knows where to attack, and of course Alireza Firouzja plays queen to g4. So this move queen to e8 was, I think, a huge positional mistake. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov should have gone into this drawish line and should have accepted the draw. So here after move queen to g4, Alireza attacks further the weaknesses, plays knight to f3. You see the g5 is hanging, also here the e5 is hanging. We have queen to f7, queen to d5, attacking the knight, and now Shakhriyar Mamedyarov tries a great counterattack, rook to f8. Really brilliant tactic, because after rook to h1 that Alireza played, here in the continuation we have a g6, fixing first the pawn structure, but now Alireza takes, and it's only a temporary loss of the piece, because here in the continuation Shakhriyar Mamedyarov played now this move, g4. G4 is very important to kick away the knight, because you cannot here play something like knight to e1. You cannot escape with the knight. That's the main issue, because you get checkmated, rook to f2, king to g1, then you get this one, rook to f1, king to h2, and now a new check you get wherever you go. Then maybe here rook to f2 or queen to h1 would be, of course, a beautiful checkmate. So that's why after move g4 you have to give up back your knight. Here king to g1 was played by Alireza, rook to f3, but now after rook to f3 and queen to f3 the game becomes more and more simplified. But as we said in the beginning, this e6 pawn can be a long-term weakness. So here queen to e6, we have queen to f7. The problem is now king to g7 is not working. You get simply queen to e5. Here black loses another piece, and even if you try to cover with the rook to f7 leads now into checkmate, queen to e8, and there is not a good way to defend this position anymore. If you try to cover with the rook, you get checkmated. If you try to play something like king to g7, then you get queen to h8 checkmate. So you cannot cover. So that's why after move queen to e6, black needs to cover with the queen, which is now the huge problem. And now after queen to f7, we have rook to f7, and now rook to h4. You see how it is very easy for Alireza to find now the best attacking moves, because of the really weak pawn structure. Here after rook to h4, we have rook to d7. Alireza takes out now this pawn. Now also this pawn is hanging. Here rook to c6, attacking also the c7 weakness. And here after move rook to d2, now I think Alireza plays maybe a slight inaccuracy. In my opinion, this would be slightly better to play rook to c7, taking out here the pawn. After king to e6, then maybe to play the move c4, and here of course white is up 2 pawns. Still probably, if black plays now this perfect endgame, it could be lead now maybe into drawish endgame. But here after move rook to d2 in the continuation, Alireza tried c4, which is slightly worse continuation because he's challenging immediately this pawn without taking this pawn with the tempo. Here in the continuation we have rook takes b2. Now finally Alireza takes. It's a little bit different but a similar position that we could have reached before. Here after move king to e6, now rook to c6, a new check by Alireza. We have a king to f5 and now c takes b5. Here rook to b3, Alireza pushes the pawn, further. Here of course Shakhriyar Mamedyarov goes behind the pawn, also Alireza goes behind the a pawn. Shakhriyar Mamedyarov takes, here Alireza also takes, and this game should probably end in a draw. But there is maybe one idea that you can make here, and the idea is somehow to cut off black's king. If you do that, if you manage to cut off somehow black's king, maybe here on the e file, and the king cannot maybe go to the king side on the f file, g file, h file, then you could maybe sneak in with your king and try to push the pawn here on the g file. That's now the only way to win this endgame. But you have to also be careful because you have to protect your f2 pawn. So that's why we can understand, I think, this very nice moves here by Alireza Firouzja. We have e4, rook to a5, attacking the king. Now again, the king has to go towards the center. Here after move rook to c3, rook to a8. Now Alireza is trying to get behind the king and at least for a while protect this weak backward pawn, the weak f2 pawn. Here in the continuation we have rook to b3, rook to f8, and now after king to e5, now comes king to f1, and here comes, I think, now the critical moment of this game. Now, as we said, you cannot really allow your opponent's rook to cut you off here. That's the main issue. As we said, king to g2, king to h3 is now the main positional threat, and we want to push the pawn forward. So in order to make a draw here, the only move that helps you out is to play rook to f3, because after rook to f3, here e takes f3, and this is now theoretical draw. Black cannot lose this endgame because white cannot approach here. Even if you try, black has also opportunities to go here behind this pawn. You cannot really leave your protection of the s2 pawn, so it should be probably a winning game here for pardon me, a drawish endgames. But after move king to f1, here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov plays a huge mistake. He plays now the move king to d4, and you see now the king is cut off. Now you cannot play rook to f3 anymore because Alireza plays of course king to g2, and now the king is cut off through the whole game, through the whole endgame. Here you cannot really include now anymore the king into the game. Now king to h3, and now g4, g5 is happening, and this is suddenly a completely winning endgame here for white. The only move, as I said, that helped out here Shakhriyar Mamedyarov was the move rook to f3. So here rook to b7, king to h3, we have king to e5, and after g4 and king to d5, believe me or not, in this position Shakhriyar Mamedyarov resigned. Brilliant stuff. Really, this was incredible what Alireza did here, but this game should probably end in a draw. It was a huge mistake. I'm not even sure if we could have said that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov was under time pressure, because when he made this mistake, he still had like 10 minutes on the clock. So it was a huge blunder by the Azerbaijan top grandmaster. I'm not sure what happened, but this game should probably end in a draw. But of course, Alireza Firouzja wins now the game, has now brutal rating performance, and is now the world's youngest 2800 rated player in chess history. His current rating is 2804. Really congratulations to Alireza. He wrote now chess history, and he's now the second best rated player in classical type format chess in the world. So great stuff. Really wild stuff happened in this great tournament. I want to congratulate to Alireza Firouzja. He gave us here really great games. Maybe some of these games, as I said, should probably end in a draw, but you take a win. Magnus Carlsen also won some games probably that she should not have won, and also other top grandmasters maybe won some drawish endgames. So as I said, it's simply part of the game. Congratulations again. I wish again Alireza Firouzja the best in this continuation of his career. This was, as I said, a historical moment for all of us. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see more Alireza games, check out my coverage so far. We had really some beautiful moments here with the top grandmaster Alireza. If you want to see maybe the top engines battling it out in their best chess games, check out my best chess games of all time series with some great games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.